Hey HTTP, it's Jessica Rosenworcel from the Federal Communications Commission, and I wanted to congratulate you on your first ever Digital Inclusion Summit. I think the future belongs to the connected. No matter who you are or where you live, you need access to modern communications to have a fair shot at 21st century success. And this cruel pandemic has really proved that point, because it used to be that we talked about broadband as nice to have, but I think we've demonstrated conclusively its need to have. So we need policies now to make sure 100% of our households have access to affordable broadband. 100%. We did it before with electricity. We did it before with access to water. We've got to figure out how to do it with access to the internet. So we need all your good ideas. Keep us posted. Let us know what they are. I don't think every good idea will come from my agency or from Washington. It'll come from conversations like this. So I can't wait to learn what you discussed today. Tell me more. Know that my office is always open to your ideas, because we're going to need lots of them to make sure that we get to reach everyone in this country and make sure we are all digitally included.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sindy Benavides, and I serve as the Chief Executive Officer of the League of United Latin American Citizens, LULAC. LULAC is the oldest and largest national Latino civil rights organization in the country. We were created in 1929 in Corpus Christi, Texas, to protect and defend our Latino community. And since then, we've expanded into 41 states, Puerto Rico, and Washington, D.C. And today, we continue to touch upon all the important issues that impact our comunidad, nuestra comunidad latina, aquí en los Estados Unidos. I am a proud member of the Technology and Telecommunications Partnership, HTTP, and so proud to call Alejandro a friend and colleague doing this very important work amid especially this global pandemic. So what has LULAC been up to? Well, I would say that what haven't we been doing? And during this global pandemic, LULAC has been helping our community increase awareness around COVID-19 through our Ayuda en Español toolkit, and by partnering with partners across the entire U.S. to make sure that we're addressing some of the greatest issues in our comunidad, including food and financial insecurity. Right now, we're in the middle of executing different events across 8 major cities in the U.S. to make sure that our comunidad has access to food. And we're so proud to be able to do this through the network of grassroots volunteers that we have across this country. You know, when it comes to the work around technology, we're also very proud to be fighting on multiple fronts and also advocating on multiple fronts. For one, what this global pandemic has exposed is that 1 in 3 Latinos still lack access to technology and broadband. And so LULAC has partnered to make sure that our comunidad, our elderly, our students, and our community in general has access to laptops to be able to do their schoolwork, but also to stay in touch and communicate with their loved ones and members. We know how important technology is, and we know how vital it is that so many of us have access to broadband, and that's why we are engaged and involved. You know, in terms of programs, LULAC is always at the forefront, and we understood years before today that access to technology was an issue. Specifically, our former CEO, Brent Wilkes, helped to start our Empower Hispanic America with Technology. And since the beginning of our tech program, we now have 68 technology centers across America to make sure that our community has access to these different labs, which oftentimes are in the heart of our communities and which are accessible not only to the parents, but to the students and to general community members. We're also happy to partner with Google on Grow with Google and make sure we're uplifting those resources and programs for all community members. And we also have our Latina Entrepreneur Academy, and it's because of this pandemic, we have shifted so many of our programming online, which has meant that LULAC has taken an additional effort and step to make sure that our community has that access to technology and is also technology literate, which is very important that we understand and that we continue to expand broadband. And lastly, a program that's really close to my heart is Tecnolochicas Lift, which is making sure that we continue to build that pipeline of Latinas going into STEAM fields, into technology. We know that Latinas are massively underrepresented in this field. And through Tecnolochicas Lift, our hope is to build that pipeline by starting in middle school and making sure that our Latinas that are still in school consider this as a potential career and pathway in the future. So we're really, really proud of that. I will tell you that the policy issues that impact not all of America, but really all of America, including individuals who live in rural communities, is really close to our heart, understanding that oftentimes Latinos also live across the stretch of our great country, including parts that are rural. And so on this front, LULAC has been advocating for rural broadband, understanding that making sure that we reach all communities during this pandemic and during this time is important as we see the development expansion of technology here in America, but also the future of work, which most oftentimes is transitioning to online and also much more heavy tech skills that our community needs to have. And so in the area of rural broadband, LULAC continues to look for additional partners. Recently, we've been working with our meatpacking and poultry industry to advocate for rural broadband, as many of their plants are located in rural areas. We're also very happy to be a part of the Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Council at the FCC and continue to advocate for issues that impact our Latino community. Alejandro, the issue of technology and broadband is an issue that for us, it's very close to our heart. And so as we think of the panel that's going to be having this really important conversation around free speech, hate speech, misinformation, disinformation, and voter suppression, we know that these are critical issues that are impacting our community right now. In fact, LULAC just filed a lawsuit in Texas again, because what we're seeing there is a real effort and an intentional effort to suppress the voters of communities of color. And I am so proud that Vanessa Cardenas, who is our senior policy advisor, will be representing LULAC on this panel. To all the panelists, thank you for all that you do every single day to champion our communities. Thank you for your sacrifices and making sure that our voices are always represented. With that, Alejandro, I turn it over to you.
The internet and its many benefits continues to transform every aspect of our lives. It has revolutionized communications and has become the primary access point and the preferred medium for almost everything we do. And with it, access to information, knowledge, and learning like we have never experienced before throughout the course of human history. It has brought us closer together, allowed us to communicate with each other regardless of geography or distance, and it has created new pathways towards greater collaboration, the ability to work from home, and for companies, access to a global workforce. That being said, the internet itself has been and continues to be transformed. In its early days, it was a static network designed to shuttle a small freight of bytes or a short message between two terminals. It was a repository of information where content was published and maintained only by expert coders. Today, however, immense quantities of information are uploaded and downloaded, and the content is very much our own. Thanks to the protections offered by Section 230 of the Telecommunications Act, which shields online platforms from certain aspects of liability from user-generated content, we are all commenters, publishers, and creators. And with that, a rise of kind of new questions and a growing tension between hate speech, free speech, and the spread of misinformation in our digital world. I sat down with Chris Lewis, CEO of Public Knowledge, Yosef Getachew, Director of the Media and Democracy Program at CommonCause, Vanessa Cardenas, Senior Policy Advisor for LULAC, Adrian Chavoya, Director of United We Dream's Disinformation Defense Project, and Carlos Gutierezz, Policy Counsel for LGBT Tech, for a candid conversation about civil rights, digital privacy, and the present and future of Section 230. Here are some of the highlights from that conversation.
Thank you, Alejandro, for bringing us together, and thank you to HTTP for fostering this conversation, which I think is super, super timely. As you mentioned, LULAC is the largest and oldest Latino civil rights organization in the United States, and we fight every day for the civil rights of Latino communities across the country. And I think that it's really important to have this conversation to provide a little bit of context on why this conversation about disinformation is so important today, particularly in the context of having an election year this year, where our community is going to play a pivotal role. So as you know, Latinos already face a number of barriers when it comes to voting, be it because of the lack of information, because of language barriers, and also because our folks are very young. The average age of a Latino is like 25 years old compared to the rest of the population, which is like 45 years old. So it's a very young, very, in many ways, sometimes isolated community from sort of the information that we need. And add to that the layer of COVID-19, which is right now what our community is going through. And I know that all of us that are on the screen right now have read the articles about just the disproportionate impact on our community. And at LULAC, we are dealing with that every day, hearing from our councils about the number of community members who are losing their jobs, who are losing their homes, who cannot afford to pay rent. So my point being here is that not only are we dealing with sort of the longstanding barriers that we had to voting, but now we're dealing with the public health and an economic crisis, right? That's adding to this anxiety. And now we have this added issue of disinformation around not just the election, but around COVID, and also around sort of the racial conversation that we're having. And this is having real impact on our communities day in and day out. And I think it's really also important to clarify disinformation is really an effort to really harm communities. It's an intentional effort to undermine our institutions, to undermine the truth, right? To the notion that you cannot believe anyone. So disinformation is not just something that happens. It's a concerted effort by bad actors, and nowadays driven mostly by domestic actors who are trying to create havoc and really just create mistrust, not just about each other, but about our democratic systems. So when you see it in that context, you can really understand how harmful this is for our folks. And this year, you know, we have been at LULAC, we have been tracking this, and obviously we are very much in touch with our councils. We have over 1,000 councils nationwide in states like Texas, Florida, Puerto Rico, and other key states where there's a large Latino community. And what we're seeing in terms of disinformation are just a couple of narratives that really jump out at us. One, there's a huge amount of disinformation on vote by mail, or just the effort to create, again, mistrust about how our election system works. So there's an effort to amplify any type of information that relates to, you know, why voting by mail is untrustworthy, right? Or why, you know, people might not be able to trust that the voting office is going to count their voting ballots. So there's definitely a huge sort of effort to just amplify those stories that, again, seeks to create a level of distrust on whether our systems, our election systems work. The second trend that we're seeing is around socialism. And I know that this is something that, you know, especially in a state like Florida, which is so important to this election, is where we're seeing it the most. But we are seeing, for example, these themes that Democrats are socialists, that Bernie Sanders is a socialist, and that he is influencing Joe Biden, that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is a socialist, that she just wants to, you know, her ideas want to take over government, and just this notion that socialism is taking over our country, which, as you know, is very triggering for some communities that have actually left authoritarian regimes. So this really, I think this theme of socialism really is targeted to those communities to really in many ways, even psychologically, just take them back to the places that they came from. So it's something that we're seeing a lot online. And the last trend that we're seeing, which to me, they're all bad, but I would say to me, this is the one that angers me the most, is this racial tensions, this information. And we saw this especially around the Vanessa Guillen case. As I'm sure most of the viewers know, Vanessa Guillen was a soldier in Fort Hood, Texas, and she was murdered. And Army officials were not doing what they needed to do to find out what happened to her. But it ended up that now there's a suspect, and the suspect is African American. So around that case, there was so much disinformation that sort of sought to portray African-American people attacking Latinos. And they would use the Vanessa Guillen case as an example of that. And that connected to sort of the Black Lives Movement and just portraying the Black Lives Movement as violent, as looters, and so on and so forth. And again, just trying to drive the message that Latinos could not trust Blacks when we know that there are Afro-Latinos among us, right? So there's this notion that there's this divide between communities. And we've also seen that in the last few weeks, actually in Florida, between the Latino and the Jewish community, which again, as most of us know, there are a lot of Latino Jews among us, right? It's not like you can divide us, but these racial tension pieces are super damaging, not just in the short term, but I think also in the long term. And this, again, bad actors that are preying on fear, preying on just our vulnerabilities, it is something that it is incredibly detrimental for not just the Latino community, but I think for all communities. So the question for us is, what we can do about it. And one of the things that we have been really proud to join at LULAC has been the Stop Hate for Profit campaign, which seeks to hold Facebook accountable and to really just ensure that Facebook stops promoting hate. And there are many ways that Facebook can do that. One is just by virtually eliminating these close groups where there's a lot of extremism and white nationalism that sort of fosters community within Facebook groups. So the Stop Hate for Profit campaign, again, is a coalition of civil rights groups, including LULAC, Bad Color of Change, ADL, the National Hispanic Media Coalition, and others. And again, our goal is for Facebook to take common sense steps to address just the racism, disinformation, and hate that prevails on its platform. And I would also just end by saying that, obviously we all have a role in stopping disinformation. One of the themes that I did not mention, but we also know that it's also super rampant in terms of disinformation online, is around COVID, right? And given sort of the disproportionate suffering that our community has experienced because of COVID, it's really just immoral to let all this disinformation about COVID and COVID cures and all this disinformation about, what we can expect from a vaccine or when and so on and so forth, to just stay on Facebook with all this disinformation around this issue. So that's something, again, that we're also tracking and that we need to address. But I would just end by saying that, we all have a role. We all, what we can do is to help stop the spread of disinformation by not engaging disinformation, by always flagging any type of violent content that we know exists, and also by pressuring Facebook, as well as other media companies and social platforms, to really do more to stop the spread of disinformation online.
Thank you all for having me here. Really an honor to be with all of you and having this discussion. My name is Adrian Reyna Chavoya, and I live in Seattle, Washington. I'm from Monterrey, Nuevo León. I grew up undocumented outside of Houston, a little afraid, but once I left and went to school in Austin, Texas, I found my calling and came out as undocumented and queer. And that's where my journey began. And, I've been working with immigrant communities ever since I was 18 years old. And I'll tell you one thing, I have seen it all. Immigrant communities rely on social media to stay connected, to get their news, to talk to each other, whether it's group chats on Facebook groups. And I know me and my friends and my colleagues at United We Dream have been dealing with disinformation since day one, spreading news about fake raids, whether it happened or not, fake Know Your Rights graphics that some white supremacists authored and put on Reddit, and then they started to share all over the place. And having to navigate life, always having to think, is this true or not? Now that instinct is not really there, right? And that is why this time around, when we began to notice that in these same spaces that folks created groups to share trusted information among each other about what's happening, we began to notice that so many of our members were being exposed to content that was straight up just fake, false, authored content that people would just come across on social media. Now, United We Dream is a national network. We have over 50 affiliates across the country, over 500,000 members all over the country. And folks have, access to their devices. We know that folks are on social media. Most of the folks that we work with are young people in high schools, in colleges, workers. All of these conversations are also happening offline where disinformation spreads. So we thought, what better way for us to start ensuring that people have good information and actually defeat disinformation by circulating good information and create counter narratives that people can engage with. Obviously, the challenge that comes with that is that, as we all know, conspiracy theories and disinformation spread so quickly because they sound very explosive and novel, right? And so we really have had to lean on the expertise of our own community to be creating the content that we distribute, to them to be the ears on the ground and be hearing what are the narratives that we need to overcome. As Vanessa shared, you put it just right. There's so much at risk for immigrant communities right now, COVID being one of them, to civic participation and just civil society overall, right? Like immigrant communities, whether you are a voter or not, if you're undocumented or you're a citizen, the truth is that you are still in communication with you're part of the fabric of society. And so we're only as strong as our weakest link. So ensuring that groups of undocumented people across the country have access to information, they are having conversations with their kids who are voters, right? If they're older immigrants, and ensure that any misinformation or disinformation relating to the voting process, that they actually have the right one and that they have consumable content that they can share around that. And, we launched this effort. It's called Reclaim the Web. You can find it online on the United We Dream website. But the thing that's really important to us here is we know that this information is not just going to go away this election or because of the effort that we're doing in 2020. It will continue. And that is why this is a social media regulatory issue that all of us have a role to play. And the truth is that we are seeing the impacts of a product that was designed, right, to ensure that people keep coming back to social media platforms and just stay in front of their devices. Sure, but look at the consequence that's having. Let's look at the consequence that's having here in the US, but also for our members. We come from countries where these same products and platforms have caused tremendous amount of civil unrest, that have created serious political turmoil that caused people to migrate. And I just want us to look at the situation in Myanmar and everything that happened there. What does accountability look like? What does accountability look like that a US-based social media company created a product that allowed for the spread of mass disinformation that caused an impact on migration patterns, yet we are more and more, the world continues to become more and more restrictive on immigration. This is just not right. The fact that this information is leading to costing lives means that we all have a role to play. That is why United We Dream has stepped up in this way. We know that we walk in the path that so many have, marked for all of us to walk through. But we are not shy of saying it how it is. Someone and social media tech companies need to be held accountable to this. We all need to be doing our role to ensure that our communities are developing a different relationship to technology, because lives are at risk here. And that is why we're doing this.
Section 230, I think, has been crucial, not only for the LGBTQ plus community, but for a lot of minority communities in terms of giving us a voice. I think if we go back to when Section 230 was passed, back with the Communications Act in 96, we had a very different landscape for LGBTQ plus individuals. To steal from Senator Wyden, one of the writers of the safe harbor provisions of Section 230, Section 230 provides intermediary internet companies with a shield and with a sword in order to kind of control content. And the shield is that internet companies are not liable for the speech of third parties on their site, which is what allowed chat rooms and kind of conversations to flourish online. And the sword part of it is that the companies will have the ability to moderate and to filter content without incurring liability as well. The sword part of this is what allows companies to actually take steps to control hate speech and to remove extremist groups online without having to do kind of a fair balance analysis. So there's two sections of that law that really kind of helped the LGBT community at its inception. So back in 96, there was not a lot of outlets for LGBT people. And we're one of the few minorities that can be discriminated even at home. So a lot of racial minorities and a lot of other minorities have a safe space to go home to, and they can talk to their families about discrimination. But the LGBTQ plus community can actually be discriminated as badly or worse in their own home as they can be outside of their home. So the internet provided a lifeline for LGBTQ plus people to be able to connect with other people, to be able to find information about community and like-minded individuals, to find medical information. It also allowed people in the community to set up their own websites, to set up their own pages of community and their own pages to disseminate information. And what Section 230 allowed these websites to do is to be able to engage in a system where they can set up, have conversations about LGBTQ plus issues without fear of being kind of discriminated against, being sued for defamation, or also with the ability to block content on their sites that was hateful, that was directed towards them, gays go to hell kind of stuff, could be blocked because of Section 230 without liability. So Section 230, I think, was crucial in allowing some of these communities to kind of take off and to kind of grow in an environment that allowed them to do so in safely. So, for example, if you have a group or a site for survivors of abuse by Catholic priests or by Boy Scout leaders, people could go and share their experiences in this group. And the website did not have to take down their conversation for fear of being sued for defamation by someone that was being discussed. I think that Section 230 has been crucial to the Black Lives Matter movement in terms of being able to post about police brutality without fear. If there was no Section 230, defamation claims might be preventing a lot of websites from posting some of the testimonials that were on there for fear of defamation lawsuits. A lot of the comments and the hashtag #MeToo movement, I think, would not have been possible without Section 230 and fear of defamation when victims came out and stepped out and spoke against people who had abused them online. If there was no Section 230, somebody could have sued Facebook for a survivor of such abuse to be able to post that on there. And my fear is that as we talk about Section 230 and as we talk about viewpoint restrictions, the danger we run into is who's controlling the viewpoint and who's controlling the restrictions. So do I trust the Department of Justice right now to control what is a reasonable viewpoint? I do not. Alarmingly, Senator Cruz, when he was talking to Mark Zuckerberg about Section 230, talked about how Section 230 was designed to be a politically neutral law. That is absolutely not the case. The whole point of 230 is that you don't have to do that. And when you have somebody like Ted Cruz and Bill Barr from the Department of Justice talking about politically neutral laws for a minority community, the LGBTQ community who has been discriminated in the past, that raises a lot of alarms. We're usually not on the winning end of viewpoint restrictions. So when we talk about viewpoint restrictions, when we talk about politically neutral, when we talk about changing 230 to limit speech, I go back to the question of who's making the decision of what speech is adequate. Because if you want to talk about illegal speech, if you want to talk about these kind of issues, all I can do is point to Russia, where Vladimir Putin passed propaganda laws that said that if you promote quote unquote LGBT content online, that's illegal and you can go to jail. So speech, again, is in the eye of the beholder. And the reason that these laws are coming up now, and the reason that the executive order that Trump passed happened the day after Twitter fact-checked them on one of his tweets, does not give me a lot of confidence that the intent of these laws is for neutrality. It is to suppress speech. It is to elevate speech that the people who are passing these laws want to be heard, not to increase the viewpoint across the community. So I think 230 is an important weapon for marginalized voices to be able to be on site and not be discriminated against.
We're a nonprofit Washington-based group that advocates for an open internet, advocates for free expression online, advocates for affordable access for everyone to communications online. And because of that, we've been working since our inception, about 20 years ago. We've been working to protect Section 230 because when it was created created to help promote free expression, to promote free speech online. And I can't agree more with what Carlos had to say. The law was there to ensure that the companies that were nascent companies, we didn't have dominant digital platforms, and we had these nascent social media companies. Some of them don't exist anymore. Some of them have grown up to be huge. And we hope more will continue to come along. But these nascent companies needed to create a space, or were creating a space for anyone, no matter how small or how independent you might be, to speak online. And this was revolutionary in the 90s because we have to remember what media was like back then. Everyone was wowed at that time because we had hundreds of channels on cable television. And before that, we just had the 3 broadcast channels. But still, even with those hundreds of channels, average citizens, average people had to ask for permission or had to jump through hoops in order to tell their own stories, to speak in their own voice about their own communities. And the internet allowed that and allowed platforms to compete for that sort of organizing, that sort of community building online. And the unfortunate thing, and I love what Vanessa had to say. We just, public knowledge, a few weeks ago gave an award to the Stop Pay for Profit campaign because I believe that the push that they're making and the push that others are making against disinformation, against hate speech, is critically important if we're going to be able to keep the benefits of the internet, the benefits of Section 230 that we've had since the mid-90s. Section 230 isn't the First Amendment, but you can see how it works paired well with the First Amendment, right? It has 2 parts that Carlos described. The sword and the shield is a great way to describe it. And with those 2 parts, it empowers the platform, not the government, not like Putin or other dictators. It empowers the platform to make decisions about moderation. And that's important. But I think now that we're seeing more and more disinformation, now that we're seeing more and more hate speech online, now that people are learning to use the virality of social media and the internet for bad things, we have to find ways to set standards. We have to find ways to set expectations. And we have to find ways to hold those decision makers in platforms accountable for those community standards. In old media, it happened through, there was the FCC with standards for content on broadcast. Then we saw that relax with cable, but still people had choices in the marketplace. And now that we have dominant digital platforms where people feel like they have to be on a Facebook because that's where their friends are, or they have to be in the conversation on Twitter, we need to promote the ability for the users of technology to have choices in the marketplace, to be able to choose a smaller platform if they want to. And setting these sorts of expectations for all platforms, big and small, is a big part of that.
My name is Yosef Getachew. I'm the Media and Democracy Director at CommonCause. CommonCause is a nonprofit organization that's focused on democracy reform issues and really holding power accountable and ensuring that we have an equitable democracy that works for everyone. Our Media and Democracy program is really designed to work at the intersection of technology issues and democracy. So looking at ways we can promote open and affordable communication systems so people can access news and information and be able to engage civically, to promote independent and diverse voices in our media so people have robust access to local sources of news and national sources of news to make informed decisions about our democracy. And of course, now it's more and more looking at how do we hold social media platforms accountable, given how dominant they've become in our society and economy and democracy, and the way bad actors are really exploiting ways they can use social media to undermine our democracy through hate speech, disinformation, and online voter suppression. So to get to your question, Alejandro, about 230, I co-sign a lot of what Chris and Carlos were saying about the intent of 230 and the role of 230. It's without a question that Section 230 was intended for platforms to create a space, an ecosystem to facilitate conversation and to facilitate the free expression of diverse voices and independent voices who, as Chris was saying, had struggled to get on through traditional media. And for the most part, up until recent times, the platforms have been able to use Section 230 to facilitate a lot of civic engagement and social movement. As Carlos was saying, it was without 230, it's very unlikely that we'd be able to get a Black Lives Matter movement or a Stop Hate movement or other types of civic movements. And that's something that we need to further encourage, particularly now when a lot of our communities are being marginalized and discriminated against. But it's also clear that when you look at the spread of disinformation and online voter suppression, platforms can be using Section 230 as a way to hide behind their content moderation decisions, as a way to say, well, we think this policy that we have is okay, even though there is voter suppression that remains on the platforms. And so the question becomes, are there ways that we can move the platforms to make better decisions? And what tools do we have? Is 230 the only tool, as you were asking? And 230 as on its own can be a tool, but the question becomes, how do you reform it in a way where you don't undermine the intent behind it, the intent to create more diverse voices, the intent to facilitate more communication online? And that's a hard question. And, I don't think there have been any strong proposals out there at the moment that get to that question. So then we have to look at what are the other tools that we have? And we have to look at how are platforms really designed for bad actors to take advantage of disinformation and on online voter suppression. And the first question that is pretty obvious is that these platforms collect vast amounts of data on their users. That makes it ample ground for people to target individuals, to target communities with disinformation. So privacy is definitely a tool that we can use to actually put some safeguards around content moderation. Policy provisions like preventing platforms from engaging in predatory data practices, to prevent them from engaging in data practices that allow actors to facilitate online voter suppression. The right to access, correct, and delete information is something that we need to be promoting. And now is a time when we have no privacy protections at the federal level, which makes it much easier for bad actors to go on a Facebook or a Twitter and figure out how they could use the vast amounts of data platforms have collected to spread disinformation.
A ti que te gusta soñar. Mezcla 5 libras de inspiración, 100 libras de ganas y 500 toneladas de acción. A ti que sabes lo que es más importante. ponle ingenio y amor al gusto. Y a ti, que buscas en quién confiar, añade amigos que sepan de tecnología y estén contigo. Y listo. AT&T, para apoyarte a ti y a ti. Visita att.com/a ti y a ti.